We're going over the most overhyped Commander cards of all time.
I'm Mia, and I like my iced coffee extra cold.
I'm BZ. I never get off the hype train. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by, you guessed it, Cool Stuff Inc., where you can go to buy Magic cards for the same price you were going to buy anyway, except, wait a second, no, you're saving 5% at checkout if you use the code
NERDS.
This isn't just go use this link for fun. This is go use this link to save money.
We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you save 5% on your real-time money dollars if you use the code
NERDS
at checkout, you can save 5 whole percentage.
That's 1/20th of your order. I'd recommend you go do it. Also, Moxfield, they're a sponsor. You're going to see stuff from them later, and you're not going to be able to guess where it is. And happy birthday to everyone whose birthday is today.
We also want to shout out our friend Alper's video, which roasts Edgar Markov proxies. You could check out the good, the bad, and the AI. So go check it out in the link below.
If you were like, I need more AI Edgar Markov proxies in my life, I mean, we got it. It's in the description. Just go watch it after this video. But we're going to get into just cards, Commander cards specifically, that came out and people were like hyped to the moon. They were like, these cards are broken. They're going to define the format. They're going to get banned. And we look at them now and they're like, eh.
Some of these were even called for bans before they even came out, and these we're just not seeing anymore.
Yeah. It's not like we were right about all these cards, blah, blah, blah. It's just like the hype for them was through the moon, and they did not live up to expectations really at all. Some of them are still good. They're just not even close to how good the community as a whole thought they were at the beginning. So we're going to start with Bootlegger's Stash. 6 mana for an artifact. Lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. Now, when this came out, Twitter was on fire. Everybody was like, why did green have to have this? Why did they give this to green? Green did not need this ability. And I was kind of like, yeah, green doesn't need this ability. I mean, people were like, Corvold, that was one of the obvious things right away. And it kind of is like, unless your deck can take advantage of it, this doesn't really give you much. It ends up being like a crew fix where you can store mana as treasures. You got to take advantage of the artifacts entering, the permanents leaving, sacrificing something. This card, I think, sucks by itself.
It's nice to have the ability on your lands if you do have extra lands floating around, but most time as Commander players, we don't really need those extra mana to exit at the end of the turn. Also, if we want to pay so much mana for treasure makers in green, why don't we just look at Old Gnawbone or something? That has way better value.
Yeah, this card was really, really hyped. It just did not live up to the hype. I mean, some decks want it, Corvold stuff, still probably interested in it, but I feel like 90% of decks are not interested. It's actually in 39,000 decks right now. I'd be curious on EDH Rec. I'd be curious where that lands in 2 years. I feel like it could get cut in half.
I think that if I saw this across the field for an opponent, I'm not sure if I'd use any targeted removal on it. I would just wait for it to get swept up in a Vandal Blast or something.
Yeah, this next card was really hyped, and I think for me, it just ended up being bad. I think some of the wording on this card was deceptive, so maybe that's what other people thought as well. It's Battle Angels of Tyr, 2 white, 4/4 flying myriad. When it hits a player, draw a card if that player has more cards in hand than each other player. Then you get a treasure if that player has more lands than each other player. Then you gain 3 life if they have more life than each other player. This was hyped. It was like one of the V mythics of the set. It was like, holy crap, this is so cool. It's like 12 power attacking in the air. But the way it's worded, if 2 players are tied for the most cards in hand, you don't get anything. The same is true for treasures, and the same is true for life. So when I've seen this card connect, 65% of the time, maybe 70% of the time, nothing happens. Then you gain 3 life maybe.
I even played it in draft here and there, and it wasn't that good. There's usually at least one blocker in the air where people could go, oh, well, I'm not giving you that if there's actually advantage or a lot of advantage to be had. And if there's not that much advantage to be had if someone's tied for something, they just go, okay, 4 damage, that's fine.
Yeah, what I think this card ended up being is it's decent stats. It's 3 4/4 flyers for 4, kind of, but it really did not live up to what its text box promised. I'm kind of disappointed because I want the one that's I'm going to draw a card and make a treasure when I hit people, but this is just not what it does really. Battle Angels is actually in 36,000 decks, but don't worry, they're going to get a lot less playable. Our next one is much less played than people might have thought initially.
The next one, it was talked about so much, and then I haven't seen it played since. It's Rootpath Purifier within 7,000 decks. 3 and a green for a 3/4. Lands you control and land cards in your library are basic lands. So in theory, you could use a Cultivate and go get, your Gaia's Cradle if it's in your deck. But does that really matter in the long run? How many basic land spells do you have to play to actually take advantage of this? And since it's not your commander and you don't have use of it, what are you going to do? Like tutor for it to go find a different land? Why wouldn't you just find a tutor for the land?
Yeah, this I still think this text box is awesome. It just was like everyone was I'm gonna put this in every deck and I'm gonna do this and this, and then like they just didn't. It just didn't end up working out that way. It's like I don't want this thing to also be a payoff for itself. It's an enabler, and it's cool. It's like if I play this, then I untap and I start doing other things, and I get crazy advantage of it. I don't want this to say, tutor a basic land when it enters, but for it to see play, that's kind of what it needed to say. It's pretty bad on its own, but the text box is so enticing. I looked at this and I was like, wait a second, here we go, and I haven't even considered playing it. I kind of forgot about it.
I think there's just too many hoops to jump through because you're going to need basic land ramp or ways to actually take advantage of the basic lands in particular, and then also be able to consistently find this.
Yeah, also like I have to downgrade a lot of my ramp. Skystroke Claim has to become, like Invasion of Zendikar, and 3 Visits has to become Rampant Growth. So I'm giving that up every time I draw those cards, but I'm not drawing this every time, so it doesn't feel worth it. Maybe if this was on a legendary creature, that creature would be so hyped. Maybe that's what needs to happen.
That's what I meant by like it's in the command zone. You have it at your disposal whenever you want. I definitely would love to see that in like a new take on landfall. That would be super cool.
Mm-hmm.
But as just a normal creature, it's kind of whatever.
All right, we get to move on to the 4th entry here. Smuggler's Share. It's 2 and a white for an enchantment at the beginning of each end step. Draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 cards this turn. Get a treasure for each person who had 2 lands enter. And that just reads so good, and it's like it's only 3 mana. It feels Smothering Tithe-esque, where it's like, well, that's always going to happen. And this was really, really hyped, and I was on this hype train all day. It's in 39,000 decks still, but I think that is like a sliver of what the potential was. I was thinking this was like 200,000 decks, like white staple, just in all the decks, and everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. And then I think what people did with this one, more so than Root Path didn't make it past like the cutting room floor of decks. This was tested, and everyone was kind of like, oh, this is not as good as I thought.
I put it in a deck recently, but that deck revolves around me having everyone else draw cards so I can make people draw whenever I want.
Totally fair.
So you can proc it a little bit easier, but just putting it down and hoping makes it dead a lot of the time.
Yeah, this was not... There's a lot of white cards similar to Smuggler's Share. In fact, the next one on the list, you probably forgot about this one, but when I say it, you're going to go, yeah, that was overhyped. Monologue tax, 2 and a white. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell, you get a treasure token. Weird, because Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff, actually not bad. It's a decent card, but I hate this card. Like, I played it, I tried it, and it did not do anything for me. And I think I was looking on Reddit for a lot of these. A lot of the quotes in the beginning were like, wow, this is white ramp. And then now it's more like, hey guys, what do we feel about Monologue tax? And everyone was like, oh yeah, I cut that card. I don't like that card.
I mean, it's not that good because it's 1 more mana than Lotho, and Lotho also triggers on your second spell too.
That I think is the big difference. You cast Lotho, cast something else, you're up a mana. This is like 1 extra mana, and you don't get the treasure from your turn. So it's like a quarter of the like utility's gone.
Yeah, it's just slower to come down, and you would think it might still be okay because Smothering Tithe is still opponents only, and that's an amazing card, but this just doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, it didn't live up to the hype. Maybe if this came out before Smothering Tithe, it would have been different, but I think with the hype of Smothering Tithe, everyone's like, oh, here we go.
This next one I was on the hype train for, and I'm so sad to see it didn't work out.
We all were.
It's Blood for the Blood God in 22,000 decks, 8 black, black, and red for an instant that costs 1 less for each creature that died this turn. Discard your hand, draw 8, and it deals 8 to each opponent, and then you exile it. I wanted this to be so good, but I put it in my Edgar deck because there were a lot of bodies, like after a board wipe, that I could cast this for 3 mana, but it was still hard to keep the 3 mana up a lot of the time, and when only a few things died, like 4 things, that's still a hefty price to pay.
Yeah, the discourse and the hype about this card was that I'm going to put this in my red-black decks because board wipes happen all the time, and I'm going to capitalize on it by holding up 3 or 4 mana when a board wipe takes out 9 creatures easy. So this is going to be super castable, and it's just not castable. Like, this card, it is a serious price to pay, and holding up 3 mana and just hoping someone else wipes the board, but not in any of, like, not with Farewell and not with Cyclonic Rift. Like, it doesn't always go your way, and it's not always castable. This card is obviously sick. It's still super good in black-red sacrifice decks. So that's where the 22,000 ended up being. But it wasn't this like, whoa, you don't have to worry about Blood for the Blood God every game. You don't have to worry about the Jund player just randomly having it. They don't have it. They figured out that it burned them a few times being uncastable.
I wanted to be so good, but there were so many times where I had 4 mana up and then, just I needed 5 because one creature wasn't there to kill. And so it was just really disappointing because you think you'll only need 3, but it will never happen that way and you'll always be burned.
Yeah, it just doesn't quite break that way enough for it. But even now I'm like, are we sure this card sucked? I really want to try it again, but I know I get burned.
If you can proc it yourself and sacrifice all of your creatures,
that's where it's great.
That's where it's going to be amazing. But if you can't and you're waiting for someone to just have a board wipe, it's going to be farewell and you're just going to be disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of Fleshback Marauder, Plaguecrafter, Innocent Blood type of stuff, that will trigger this very well. Like if you flashback Dread Return on a Plaguecrafter, you're in business. But if your deck is like, pass with 5 mana up, I hope that 6 creatures die, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, that's just a lot to hope and a lot to put on the other players, too.
Right, yeah. What else would you put on other players if you had to?
I would tell them to go to moxfield.com, the best deck building website in the entire web.
I think this maybe was our most telegraphed Moxfield. It wasn't the best segue, but it is the best deck building website, like Mia said, on the whole web, which people still call the internet.
The entire World Wide Web, there is one place to build your deck, and it's Moxfield.
In all of the WWWs.
That's the one. It's really great to keep track of the budget of your deck. I know BZ just had a bunch of 50s that were like $60, $65, and he just brought them down to 50 because Moxfield clearly displays the price.
Yeah, my Atali went up to $15, and I could see that in Moxfield very easily with the intuitive UI, so I just went, I'll cut that card for my $50 budget deck. It doesn't belong in there anymore. I can't fit it. So then I'll just put in another card thanks to Moxfield. Moxfield, we love you.
This card I wasn't the biggest fan of, but there was so much hype for it online. It's Ickermoon Gauntlet in 21,000 decks. Tuna blue, planeswalkers you control have 0 to proliferate and -12 take an extra turn after this one. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent. Put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. This is supposed to be really good in Super Friends decks, but I don't think it's that good considering 12 is a lot of loyalty to get to, and planeswalkers are really vulnerable, especially when you have 3 other players coming at you.
Yeah, and the 0 proliferate is nice, and it's like a weird kind of like flux channeler, but only from one thing, and it's like an artifact, so maybe it's a little bit... This might be the one card that I disagree with like people in general on. I think this card ended up being like abysmal, but it is fun. Like it's more of a fun card. I think that's where the 21,000 comes in. But this is not, at least if you ask me, a Super Friends staple in any means. It's really pretty close to a do nothing unless you have a bunch of planeswalkers out, in which case that's like your dream scenario anyway. So like you're not gonna go proliferate, 0 proliferate, 0 proliferate, 0 proliferate, alt my 4th planeswalker. I just don't think that's gonna happen. And if that is the case, you kind of win with a ham sandwich at that point. You got 4 planeswalkers in play and you untap with them all.
Yeah, this is the planeswalker win more card, honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm so sad because I pulled one of the oil slick ones. The treatment of this entire set looked really cool, but that is a disappointing card to pull.
It definitely is nowadays. All right, number 8, one of the ones that made me the happiest. I just thought it was the funniest. Ren and Realmbreaker in 18,000 decks. Pretty low. What people were saying about this card was, oh my god, oh boy, it's Chromatic Lantern with upside. And I laugh at that take a little bit just because I think this is Chromatic Lantern with downside. Ren and Realmbreaker has your lands tap for any mana as a static. +1 up to 1 target land becomes a 3/3 with Vigilance, Hexproof, and Haste. It's still a land. -2 mill 3, and you can put a permanent from among the milled cards into your hand. And -7, you get an emblem with you can play stuff from your graveyard. This card is very underwhelming. I don't value the Chromatic Lantern text really at all, so the +1 doesn't give you any kind of advantage. You don't want to ever make your land a 3/3 because that'll just make it vulnerable. This feels like Chromatic Lantern you can attack, and the -2 can whiff. I know you can get lands from among them, but this was an underwhelming Planeswalker. I had this in a Planeswalkers deck, and I was like, ultimating it. You have the doubling season. It starts at 4 loyalty, then it goes to 8, and you ult -7. It was still just okay.
I think this is really rough, even as planeswalkers go, and they're the most delicate type in Commander. The -2 is just, look at a couple cards, maybe you'll put 3 instants and sorceries into the graveyard. That's so rough. And the fact that you have to still pay for the ultimate. I thought ultimates were supposed to be cool.
What, you still just have to cast them?
Yeah, you still have to
pay the cost.
You still have to pay for them. I figured if I have to work that hard to get to a 7 and then ult it, and it's just Chromatic Lantern with upside, Sure. Then I better get something cooler than, I guess you could cast stuff from there.
Yeah, I think part of this one was this card was hype. It was like 50% of people hated it for constructed, and 50% of people were like, oh, guys, it's over. Welcome to the Ren and Realmbreaker winter. It's like, this card just ended up being garbage. And I'm bummed out because a creature that bonds with Realmbreaker, like, that better be super cool. It was not super cool. It was like, this could have been Nissa number 10.
Yeah, I think they were definitely like entranced by the art and the story, and then read the card and went, wow, this is awesome. And
it has to be cool,
we're
right?
Just wrong.
Yeah. Okay, next up was a card that people were looking at and they were like, well, this is just going to combo. This is going to tutor up your combo pieces. This is going to end games. This commander's going to be broken. It's not going to be fun. It's old stick fingers, obviously. It's X black green for a star. When you cast a spell, you flip to hit X creatures, put them into your graveyard, then the rest go on the bottom in a random order, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So people were like theorizing, and they were like, well, okay, turn 5. I have cast them for 5. I only have 3 creatures in my deck. I go get them, and then I win somehow. And it's like, it's so close because it feels degenerate. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. I can put only 5 creatures in my deck, put them all in the graveyard every time, or I can pay 3 mana, 5 mana, X3, put 3 creatures in my graveyard, no matter what. My deck's got a lot of creatures and I want them in the graveyard, and it's big. And it just was like, I think the X black green is what made it just not exciting. It's in 19,000 decks, but this was not like a Golgari staple.
I think it could have been really cool. That sounds awesome for a Golgari dex. But, I mean, I think it's not that interesting. It's interesting that you can pay into it, but I feel like the star should have been one of the biggest selling points, and I don't really care, especially if it doesn't have trample.
Yeah, the more you pay for it, the less exciting the star is. And then paying 2 mana for like a 10/10 in the late game, I'm really not interested. I'm a graveyard deck. I'm trying to do shenanigans. But yeah, the 19,000 decks is not as Commander. That is in the 99, and it's just like, he did not shape up for that. I don't think anyone's really doing broken things with old stick fingers. Let me know if you are, but not as many as people thought. Not even close.
I wish I could see more broken things with old stick fingers. He looks so cool.
He's got the stick. I relate to that, man. The next one is probably the one that fell the hardest, where people had it as number 1 from the set. I think we had it really high from Ikoria. It's Manascape Refractor. It enters tapped, it costs 3, it has all activated abilities of all lands on the battlefield, and you can spend mana like Rainbow to activate its abilities. People were like, whoa, this is Gaia's Cradle, Cabal Coffers, Strip Mine, Fetch Lands, whatever, insert another better land here, and it's like, yeah, it's all those things, but it's also a 3 mana tapped Manalith, and if there's no spicy lands in play, this card sucks.
I also like the idea where it's like, this could be a fetch land. It's like, okay, I'm going to pay 3 mana to get a tapped fetch land.
People were saying, they were like, that's the worst case scenario.
No, the worst case scenario is that there's like a basic on the field and you have a 3 mana basic come in tapped.
Most lands in play, I think, at any given moment are like duels and even like strip mines. And that is not what I want to pay 3 mana for. So you really have to have like a Cradle or a Cabal Coffers or something like something like that. And it just, nobody plays this card anymore. We were hyped on it. I know me and Joe, and when this thing came out, I was like, well, this is just cracked, right? No, it's funny laughing about it. I have not considered this card since it came out. I forgot about it.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where if you're playing high-powered lands, you're not going to be playing 3 mana rocks. It's just, they just kind of oppose each other. That's a low-power card and high-power cards.
Right. You're not tutoring for Gaia's Cradle. You're not crop rotating for Gaia's Cradle and then paying a 3 mana tapped thing that's like also Gaia's Cradle. Just like Thespian Stage It or something. It just didn't end up being worth the slot. What I want to know, though, from you is I'm really, really curious what super overhyped Commander releases that we missed, because I would love to do a part 2 for this. Yeah. So like, if you have any that we totally missed, give us a shout in the comments.
But if you want to know some cards that weren't overhyped and some really awesome ones from this year, you can see the top commanders of this year. And what's the tip for the day?
The tip for the day is to make sure you always have a tip for the end of your videos. Good tip.